Good evening, friends. Thank you for joining us this week on the Nonprofits. Tonight is Monday, January 27th, and we have got a lot of interesting articles to cover this week. We are going to first go to California, where they're unfortunately dealing with the harsh realities of nature, and many people's lives and livelihoods are at stake, and our hearts go out to them. But there's something else that we want to talk about going on with California, and AJ is going to kick it off.
That's right. California is burning during one of the most destructive and devastating forest fires in the state's history. There's been 12,000 structures destroyed, tens of thousands of people have to move due to evacuations. There's 27 human lives lost so far, and the impact to animal life isn't even measurable at this point. But who has time for that? At least not the conservative right-wing online influencers like Charlie Kirk and Christopher Rufo, both of whom have said that, we need to look away from the world burning and point us to what they consider the real distraction: sign language interpreters taking over half of the screen during televised emergency announcements. This article was from Mother Jones and written by Julia Metro on January 13, 2025.
Yeah, thank you so much, AJ. I am not so sure how, with all of the destruction, and you know what? I'm being nice. Not so sure. I mean, let's be honest. It's ridiculous. All the destruction that is kind of spreading across California, and this religious demagogue has time to demonize sign language interpreters. Why do you think that is? What are your first thoughts on targeting another minority group versus talking about the real problem?
I think that it's been clear lately that the conservatives have just waged a war against all the things that they consider woke, with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusivity practices. They push so much that many businesses who had adopted these initiatives have since decided to completely drop them because they felt too much pressure from the conservatives, and they fear losing profits. Every company fears losing profit. But these initiatives are meant to support both, customers, employers that come from marginalized communities, like people from different races, genders, sexual orientations, or disabled people. And they've made so much progress at taking away the rights of, for example, transgender people, that it makes sense that now they have to find a different type of target: anyone who isn't like them. And it just so happened to be interpreters. But I think that that's not actually the target. I think that deaf people is the target, because trust me, there is the people that this service benefits who they want to take down.
Yeah, Jonathan, she raises a point that it maybe the scapegoat, maybe the new boogeyman is the ASL interpreters. But yeah, there are certainly second and third order effects of that. Taking that away takes information away from a lot of people. How does this relate to the conservatives, the right-wing movement in this country? I almost said Republicans, but I have to remind myself that not everybody that makes up the party, granted it's a small number, is part of the red wave, if you will. But the people that are part of the red wave, have this desire to control information, at least in my opinion. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And how does that relate to them making a boogeyman out of the ASL interpreters?
Well, and in my thoughts about it, they have to have some way of keeping people from being compassionate or empathetic to a Hollywood, a democratic stronghold. They cannot allow any positive information about the more liberal people in our society, because that is a direct assault on their philosophy of life. They are couching all of their activities on defeating an enemy, and they've demonized entire segments of our population so that they can fight an enemy, and that will get people to unite under their banner to fight a destructive enemy. But they're picking on people who can't normally have no political power and can't fight back. And this is something that is cowardly. It's really cowardly to pick on a sign language interpreter. These people study for years to be able to emote and get people to understand all of what's being said and how it's being said, voice inflections, the underlying meaning of words that you cannot get from a printed page. You need that. It's part of a deaf person's grammar.
Yeah.
You can't do without it if you really want to understand what's being said. I only took one sign language course. My instructor was completely deaf, and the only day we had an interpreter was the first day. I didn't learn all that much in the 2 or 3 months I was there. I'm not real talented at it, but it made it perfectly clear when he was talking to a student halfway across the park from the front of the classroom about something that needed to be said in the class. It was quite amazing that the amount of emotion that can be transmitted. I didn't get to interact with a lot of deaf people at that point, but I did live across the street from a deaf individual recently, and we managed expert lip reader, but that wasn't really, I had to ask her how to say certain things because I didn't think that they were expressing enough.
Yeah.
I was never very good at using the expressions on my face to communicate information.
Well, that, that is a good point you raised, because I don't think, and granted, people who are deaf have to navigate the world in far different ways than the rest of us do. Now, I couldn't imagine not living with one of my senses, or excuse me, living without one of my senses. I couldn't even imagine not having an appendage or having, something debilitative really affecting the way I live. But to not have one of your sensory information abilities is incredibly, it must be incredibly difficult to navigate life, but people do it. And I think that we can relate in a sense to the way they receive information, because just because we have all of our senses, we still, look at me right now. We still have our facial expressions and things like that we communicate with. I think that taking away the ability for those, for deaf people to receive information, as minimal as it may be compared to the rest of us, is a way to control information, just like the two of you have said. But it's also a very fascist, a very fascist characteristic, if you will. Let's look at the most famous. Yeah, right. Let's look at the most famous fascist movement in all of history, World War II, the Holocaust, right? Germany. Disabled people were targeted. And now we see that happening from the religious right, who can be characterized, a lot of their policies, as fascist. And it is dehumanizing in a way. And we have seen that over and over again from this right movement, just dehumanizing everybody that stands in their way. And Jonathan, I think you brought up a great point about the Hollywood factor. I hadn't even thought about that. But the type of information that people pick up from TV, that can have a devastating effect if it's transmitted.
They're trying to demonize not just disabled people, which is an actual tenet of the American neo-Nazis, is to get rid of all the disabled people.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they're doing is they are basically targeting everybody who isn't them.
Yeah.
But that's
but they do it through these means, these groups, and then they can they'll move to another group eventually after they've sufficiently beaten down the disabled people. They'll move to somebody else, They'll move to Italians, or they'll move to somebody they can beat up and don't have a lot of power.
Hey, AJ, you had a point, and you were about to chime in. Forgive me, but you had a point on people being dehumanized, and I wanted to get you to expand on that.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I was going to make. What Jonathan was saying is correct. Like the way that they do this is by dehumanizing entire groups of people in order for their listeners or their supporters to then be okay with whatever they suggest that they're after. So, but what they don't understand is that sign language, as Jonathan also pointed out, is a full language. It's not English, okay? It's its own unique language. It has sentence structure. It has visual cues. Like you can have the same hand shapes for many different signs, but you place them in different positions and you make different faces, and it means completely different things. It's like written versus spoken English, right? And you can miss a lot of context when you send a text message versus when you speak to somebody in person. No. So if I were to, I've learned some sign language because, as you all know, I'm also deaf. So if I say something like, you're not going to know what I'm saying. But if I say, I hate you, then you're going to know by my face, even if I didn't say it. If I didn't make the mouth movements, you will know that I'm like saying something, kind of like mean or like I'm having an emotional response, right? And that part, I would have to say, was one of the things that bothered me the most about this article. It wasn't even like the call to stop sign language from being used, but rather one of the quotes that Christopher Rufo said in response to the Los Angeles County Emergency Management news conferences. He said, no wild human gesticulators are necessary. Now, I know that word is not inherently negative, but in this context, he was kind of saying that sign language, that people who use sign language are wild. And then he clarifies by saying human. Like, it had a disgusting feel to it. Like, maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but like it seemed like he was trying to say that it's animalistic.
Well, I don't think you're interpreting it wrong, because by him calling them wild, it goes to show you that he doesn't understand what is going on. And for anybody that wants to control the media or control the narrative to not understand the message that's being transported, this can be incredibly threatening, in my opinion. And I think that is the reason you have Charlie Kirk labeling ASL interpreters as woke, because it's akin to him not knowing what's going on and him fearing what he doesn't understand. And that right there, I think, is what leads to a fascist kind of ideology. And Jonathan, I wanted to see, when I said fascism, you kind of perked up a little bit. How does this help the right-wing agenda at all?
I think what it does is, again, they're just trying to get not just their base, but people sitting on the fence to hate the same things they hate, so that they can form a tribe that is external to the tribe of being a United States citizen, but it's still within the group. So the Venn diagram would have a little circle of fascists in here that they can use. It only takes a third of the people, in most cases, historically, to take over a government. So, they're trying to put themselves in power so they can stay in power, and they can dictate to us exactly what we have to do and have us as little serfs and feudal slaves in order to make them wealthy and to fight their wars for them as they go on marching, trying to get the rest of the world to agree with them, even though they know they are totally wrong in how they're anticipating things. And one of the things that bothers me is that what they don't understand, they actually understand it all too well, is people aren't born with any persuasion. They are educable. And so as they educate or program people to be like them, you don't get rid of this kind of evil. And it is evil.
It's so astonishing. It's so astonishing that this is happening in my lifetime. something that I never thought would have happened. You know, I have a funny story. And I don't mean to digress for a bit, but this relates. I gave a lecture a couple weeks ago. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'm an adjunct professor of national security studies. One of the schools I'm partnered with, I gave a lecture on presidential powers, and I gave this ridiculous example to remain objective, right? To not say anything that would be controversial. I said, let's just say, for example, the United States went to war with Canada. And people chuckled, and I thought it was ridiculous. That's the only reason I said it. And then lo and behold, we're in this fight where we're slinging shots back and forth with Canada for reasons I'm not going to get into. And I just can't believe that we're in the spot that we're in, to the point that we have religious clergy members, if you will, ignoring a wildfire, ignoring the fact that their God is not showing up to do anything, and instead attacking sign language interpreters. We are living in a circus. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And you know what, AJ, forgive me, I forgot that you were deaf, and I forgive me, I didn't mention that, and I actually mentioned that we all could we had our capabilities. But what was your thought? How personally did this strike you when you first read this article?
I was quite shocked. I think it's just a sort of a distraction, and it caught me off guard, because as someone who has depended on that type of communication, I haven't always had my cochlear implant, so I either depended on the captions very often, or somebody telling me, like, if I was out and I couldn't hear somebody out there talking to me, I don't know, a waitress or whatever, I will have to turn to somebody in my family and be like, hey, what did they say? Even though the person's right there in front of me. So for me to hear somebody saying, hey, like, whether you hear this or not doesn't matter, was like shocking. I'm going to say, though, that this is actually dangerous. This isn't just about being fascist or dehumanizing people. It's about putting people's lives at risk.
Yeah.
There's about 3 million people, deaf people in California. About 1 million of them live in the Los Angeles area, which is where all the fires are happening right now. But this is just one state. The United States has about 11 million deaf people and 45 million people who have some degree of hearing loss. So this is like a major number. It's not just a few people that are listening to these emergency response communications that could potentially save their lives in those type of situations, like a fire, a hurricane, a tornadoes. Like, you need to move quickly. And so it's incredibly frustrating, because there's just so many implications to this request of removing American Sign Language interpreters from emergency announcements.
Yeah, and this leaves people incredibly vulnerable. The thing that is shocking to me, I think, and at this point in my life, very few things shock me anymore, but this idea that they have, the right wing, the super conservative, maybe somewhat fascist right wing movement, it thrives on demonizing or dehumanizing people, attacking people, making them vulnerable. And we all said in the beginning of the show, they've moved to minorities, and then they move to the LGBTQ, and then when they've done that, they move on to somebody else. I almost feel like they're not succeeding, because the LGBTQ movement is not succumbing to them. It's not succumbing to this movement. People are stronger. People are more vocal. And I almost wonder, why did they move on to the ASL? I mean, they still haven't conquered the people they set out to conquer originally. And then I thought, these people have the ASL community has no track record of having to defend themselves. It's such an easy target, and it's so cheap. And so, Jonathan, I wanted to pivot back to you and kind of get your final remarks on this topic. I know that you kind of came up with the idea of them having an imaginary boogeyman, but where do we go from here? You're muted, by the way, my friend.
Pulling a problem here. They've always had somebody to fight. We had communism to fight. Before that, we had Nazism to fight. Before that, we had the Spanish-American War. There's always been somebody to focus their anger on rather than focus on improving the United States. And the only other thing I would say is, you think that it's different from when you were younger. I'm 30 years older than you.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, we still said the Pledge of Allegiance in class and meant it. Of course, we were ducking under our desks for nuclear drills, but it was like a whole different world. This world, to me, is dystopian as hell. It is absolutely ridiculous that these people would have the gall to go after ASL interpreters when half a state is burning down.
Yeah.
That is like the most absolutely evil thing to do. And I think they do that to desensitize people to the evil they do.
Yep.
So
yeah, I would agree there. This is a distraction. We're talking about this right now. There's so many other things that we could be talking about that are just a disaster, right? But we're talking about this, and rightfully so. These people shouldn't be targeted, but distraction after distraction, we keep getting faced with the most just asinine views and attempts. And I want to leave it there, but not without giving AJ about a minute or so to close us out. So what are your thoughts, AJ?
I think empathy is what we need.
Yep.
Earlier you mentioned about living without one of your senses and what that feels like. And I know what that feels like every single day. Yeah. I wake up and I go to bed and I take off my implant and I'm completely deaf. And I put it on in the morning and it's like an influx of sounds. And sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. And it's like getting used to that and then back to taking it off when I have to do something that, requires me to take it off. And it's like, if people were to put themselves in my shoes for a moment, maybe they wouldn't think about these things like taking away the way that I communicate with them.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I'm going to say.
When these religious and fascist demagogues are up on their high horse, they are far away from people who face the ailments and face the real challenges in life that we all face to a certain degree. They can remove themselves from the needy and from the people that need support, and demonize them instead. And that's what we're looking at. And you know what? Their religion, their God, it's not helping. It's just a tool for control. It's a tool for dehumanization, demonization, and it really gets us nowhere. And we've got a lot of things like that to talk about. So click on one of the links below and stay tuned to the nonprofits if you want to see more.